that you couldn't stand anymore. Backs off the microphone at this point. And this session, again, introduces a number of ideas and a number of different perspectives on foresight, science and technology foresight from all over the globe. And the first presentation is from a small country just north of France, and from Дэвид Сарпонг from the University of the West of England in UK, and also at HSE ISSEK, Russia. You can see the title of the presentation in front of you. And as we all settle down, it is my great pleasure to hand over the floor and the microphone to Дэвид Сарпонг. Дэвид?
Yeah. Thanks very much, Ted. I think since this morning, we've been talking a lot about foresight at the national level and global level, and of course, at the regional level. And I'm glad to present something to you quite at a very low level, at the meso level, at the firm level. So, of course, a lot of the work that has been done at HSE has empirically focused on huge conglomerate SOEs and, of course, public and regulatory organizations. And in this case, we want to take a step back and look at the private sector, how foresight is actually taking roots in private firms. So this is a work in progress, which I'm hoping to replicate in Russia in the next coming year. So if anyone is interested in this work, especially my Russian counterparts, please let me know. We've got a data set, everything available, and we can take off from there. Right, so what then is foresight? And of course, I'm speaking from the organizational level. And instead of coming up with a definition, I decided to pick one of the most interesting quotes that's been cited frequently from Alfred Northhead, who tends to describe what foresight actually is. And he talks about the ability to see through the apparent confusion, yet to spot developments, so transporting, before they become, spot development before they become trends, ability to see patterns before they emerge, and of course to grasp the relevant features of social currents that are likely to shape the direction of future events. From an organizational perspective, in terms of strategic foresight, we'll normally conceptualize it as kind of possibilities and potentialities. So how firms are able to identify potentialities and possibilities in the future of which their competitors actually overlook. Foresight, especially at organizational level, is more of connecting the past with the present and, of course, the future. Most of the time, we get so fixated on the future that we tend to forget about the past. And of course, historiography is very, very important, which influences our current actions and of course has massive implications on what we do in the future. So in this sense, when you're looking into strategic foresight, then it's about developing organizations' periphery, the peripheral vision of an organization. And of course, we know that the periphery is always blurry. You turn in one side and you turn focusing on one particular side, then of course, this particular end becomes your periphery. You move that way, then this end becomes your periphery. And when you look at the strategic management literatures, a lot of the emphasis has been on the development of core competencies and capabilities, which of course require firms to focus. And in that sense, most of them end up losing their periphery. Of course, they do not get what is happening beyond the theoretical boundaries of their firms. And of course, you've got these weak signals and trends, which they tend not to spot because they get too focused on meeting their customers' needs in the present. And in this case, what we are proposing as a form of situational awareness, drawing on the eye as an example, is to pull information from the past and, of course, the future, where we want to go to, and bring it to the present so that we can act on it. And the question here is, does foresight represent a distinctive capability, especially in organizations? And when I talk about distinctive capability, I'm actually drawing on the work of Ricardo talking about narratives, and he talks about the future. And to be able to understand and build an interesting future, then you will have to make sure you think in bounded terms, in thinking in streams. So you think of the past, which normally is about attention, the present, and of course, you think about the past, which links into the future. So in understanding foresightfulness here, we are very much interested in distinctive capability, narratology, but this time we decided to move a bit into doing some bit of quantitative work, because in recent past, work in the UK, especially the research assessment exercise, has actually put a lot of emphasis on I wouldn't call it practice per se, but on impact, how our research actually impact on business and society. So in this case, we decided to do some bit of quantitative work and, of course, try to understand what is happening in organizations. Are they making use of foresight practices at all? And if they are making use of them, does the external environment actually have massive implications on the propensity for firms to engage in foresight activities? And of course, when it comes to foresight, the processes very similar. We all know the task-oriented analytic process, starting with framing, scanning, and forecasting, and visioning. And of course, we've got so many tools, of which this morning we saw lots of them from Jonathan's presentation on competitive intelligence. So here I've just listed a few of them: scenario planning, business war gaming, and so on. And of course, if you look at the strategic foresight literature in terms of organizations, there are two dominant perspectives in cultivating this foresight, or actually developing the potential to see into the future. And the first one has been corporate foresight exercises, which will normally involve scenario planning, which is done yearly, a kind of interventionist approach. And we've got the new emerging perspective, which is more or less very much theoretically driven, drawing on the practice then in contemporary social theory. So in this case, we thought we'll move away from all the linear and more recursive stuff, and now go out there and see whether firms are actually engaging in foresight practices at all. And in this case, we decided to go for SMEs, because clearly SMEs have not received a lot of attention in the foresight literature. And that is probably one of the weakest link at HSE at the moment. A lot of the emphasis has been on conglomerates, state-owned enterprises, and we are not really, I don't think we are really engaging so much with small businesses who, of course, also require understanding of the future. So we decided to look at small enterprises in the southwest of England to see whether they are really making use of these foresight practices, and of course, what actually influences them to make use of it. And of course, whenever we talk about foresight, it's more about the business environment, which is in constant flux and transformation, which keeps changing. And organizations, if the environment is changing, then of course they will want to engage in strategic planning exercises and foresight practices to understand the environment. And of course, the environment informs what they do. So we wanted to understand what is it that they do. We needed a theoretical lens, of course. But before I talk about the theoretical lens, in terms of the environment, we thought we will look at two specific dimensions, which I'll go on later on about. But for now, what we believe is organizations are normally embedded in high-velocity environments, but some firms are also embedded in placid environments, especially when you think of SOEs, who are very much protected by government regulations and so on. So actions and practices adopted by firms will differ. Of course, if you are an SOE who is very much protected, then we would expect that you are less likely to take up foresight practices. I'm sure my Russian colleagues will disagree. Institutional environment also we think shape action. So institutions, we all know the impact of institutions on our cognitive structures and the way we think, the way people behave in organizations, and of course, the broader institutional context in which the firm is embedded. So the country's culture, everything impacts on the way even managers actually perceive risks, and of course, their propensity to engage with uncertainty and of course ambiguity. Right, so we needed a theoretical lens to engage in this study, and I decided to go for something quite simple, perceptual learning. And of course, we can basically summarize all the stuff that we're talking in Foresight about into learning. And of course, learning in this case is much more of perceptual one, where you're trying to understand the environment. And in doing that, we drew extensively on the work of Gibson. He talks about perceptual learning, and he actually draws on microorganisms, actually animals in their natural habitat. And his argument is very simple, that animals actually develop their senses based on the kind of environment in which they are embedded. The environment actually informs them, and of course, that shapes the way they think, the way they behave, the way they respond to stimuli. So in that case, we conceptualize the organization as an animal, of course, embedded in an environment, and here we're talking about the macro environment or the country, wherever the firm is embedded. It could be the industry and so on. So I wouldn't want to go on a lot about Gibson's work. If you want to have a look, you can read a lot more on Gibson's work, 1999, on perceptual learning. Right, so making sense of the future. So what we did, we thought the environment could be divided into two distinct elements. We got competitive environment and, of course, the institutional environment. So the competitive environment, we're talking about the industry pressures and so on, the context in which the firm is embedded. And the institutional environment, we're talking about the broader environment, which the firm is embedded. So you got a country impacting on the country's cultures and stuff, structures, everything, shaping the way things are done in the organization. So we wanted to basically examine the factors that actually impede or support small and medium-sized enterprises' engagement with flexible and appropriate foresight practices, especially when we think that foresight is becoming a social practice, which is done in everyday situated practices or situated activities. Then we expect them to be doing most of the stuff that we mentioned here this morning, trend spotting, value chain analysis, and so on and so forth. So technological change. Yeah, the environment, when it comes to the competitive environment, we divided that into two. We have technological change and dynamism, which basically is about identifying weak signals, investment in foresight systems, developing defense peripheral visioning, and so on. And here we develop one hypothesis. SMEs are more likely to participate in perceptual learning when they operate in very competitive markets. Yeah, so if you are embedded in a high-velocity environment, you are more likely to engage in foresight practices. Then again, when it comes to the competitive environment, we had the second part, which is the hostile competitive environment. So hostility here, we're referring to firms which are embedded in environments where they've been involved in price wars and how they compete in this kind of hostile environment, which can be very, very difficult when managers tend to make decisions on the hook because they will have to survive. And here we develop a second hypothesis, and it's very simple. SMEs are likely to participate in perceptual learning practices when they operate in competitive markets characterized by high levels of hostility. Organizational environment, again, here we're talking about the institutional environment, and also we divided that into two. We look at the cognitive dimension, and of course, we look at the regulative dimension. So the cognitive dimension, we're looking at the firm itself, inside the organization itself, the shared culture, mental models, whatever, the way the organization operates, and of course, the broader environment in which the firm is embedded itself. So that's what I just mentioned. We had the cognitive pillars, and of course, the regulatory pillars. So we had another hypothesis. So that should be hypothesis 3 and hypothesis 4. Sorry, I've got hypothesis 3 on there. So if you're embedded in, if you have shared social knowledge and so on, then of course you would expect the firm to engage in more foresight practices. And of course, the regulative environment, when government support is available, then we believe that firms are likely to engage in foresight practices. Right, so I have to be very quick. So we had SMEs, 250, most of them employing 250 people. We couldn't go for the European Commission kind of standard because our sample size was very small. We had 365 firms that met our criteria. And of course, response rate was quite low, just 24%, which is not bad though. responses were dominated by manufacturing firms in the southwest of England. And of course, you can have a look at the details later. We had some control variables, the age of the firm, of course, the firm size, and we had our models which we estimated using hierarchical regression. Right. So just a bit of the zero-level correlation. Clearly, you could see that perceptual learning is quite important. And of course, we've got dimensions for perceptual learning, which included seeking broad consensus, and of course, organizing scenario workshops, encouraging outline opinions, not allowing subjugated voices, and so on and so forth. So that's for the principal component analysis. Then we've got the result. The correlations among independent variables were modest, and of course, these are some of the statistical detail stuff which we can have a look at later. We've got our correlation matrix here, which I've got very little time left.
You've got 5 minutes before
5 minutes, yeah?
You need to stop speaking.
Okay, so we got our correlation matrix here, and of course, for our hypothesis, we use the hierarchical multiple regression model, and we adjusted for the baseline model, control variables model 1, which was significant, and of course, we modeled the competitive environment, model 2, and model 3 was the institutional environment. The results are quite interesting, actually. What we found was when it comes to institutional environment, you realize that the cognitive dimension was quite important, which has massive implication on firms picking up foresight practices, whereas the regulatory environment didn't really support our hypothesis, which is quite surprising. So clearly, firms in the west of England or UK firms are very wary of government. SMEs don't want to really engage with government. And of course, which is a bit different here, where you have a lot of relationship, especially with the SOEs, which calls for a comparative study, actually, to see what's happening in Russia. Also, for competitive environments, when it comes to technological dynamism, of course, we've got positive correlation. And when it comes to business professional services, which links into the regulative institution, also we tested negative. So we had empirical support for hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2, unfortunately, was not supported. Hypothesis 3 was supported. Hypothesis 4 wasn't supported at all. So increasing levels of government support is not associated with higher levels of perceptual learning. Yeah. So I would say this is just a preliminary study, and of course, because our data is quite small, we're hoping to reopen up to see whether we will get more firms to fill in our questionnaires for us, our survey, and hopefully we're looking forward to run a comparative study, ideally in Russia, which will be a fantastic laboratory, thinking about the kind of institutional structures that you have here, especially when it comes to the regulatory institutional dimension. And from a policy prescription perspective, perhaps I think more emphasis should be placed by government not to supporting ever increasing business support services at all, because the SMEs are not really engaging with them. They are not interested. They are very wary. Probably it's because we have a conservative government in the UK, even though very business-like. People think the austerity and all those kind of stuff. They're not really supporting SMEs, but rather supporting multinational enterprises who are paying big donations to the Conservative Party. So there might be differences in other places which we will really want to have a look at. But for us, this is a great opportunity to see the impact of foresight work in SMEs, to see whether it's resonating with managers, whether they are actually engaging in all this kind of foresight practices, the theories, the ideas, the models that we're developing every day. Or we just come into our conferences and have a chat about how they could manage, and they really don't care about our models and new methodologies that we think can help them understand the future. So thank you very much, and I hope...
Good?
Yeah. So I'm going to make the slides available, and the paper is also available, so if you want to have a copy, you can have it.
Well, thank you very much, David, and for shooting well under time. we'll take a few questions. I did wonder what kind of animals these businesses were, but we won't go into that. Some were lame ducks, presumably, and also I wondered how you linked perceptual learning to the mechanisms we normally associate with foresight, and just what that connection was between those, because you didn't spend much time saying how you operationalized the perceptual learning.
Yeah, so for the perceptual learning, we operationalize it drawing on the extent to which the firm engage in corporate foresight exercises, so scenario planning, value-added activities, value chain analysis, business simulations, transporting, and so on. That's what we did. So we wanted to see whether are they engaging with these practices at all, or they are not.
Right. Yep, there's a question now.
Okay, it's a really interesting presentation for me, since I'm a country where SMEs are very much on the scene and agenda. According to your presentation, SMEs are more inclined to use the foresight practices, but especially for micro and small SMEs, do they have capacity and capability to apply these results into the practices?
Yeah, probably that is why we've never focused on them, and like.
Does your model say something about this?
No, but it's also because of our own theoretical assumptions. Because we assume that strategic foresight is something that is in flux and transformation. It's a social practice. People engage in foresight practices without really knowing that they are engaging in foresight at all. So. It can be a bit difficult to really put a pin on to say, well, this is foresight, this is not foresight. So we had these dimensions, whether you were organizing, foresight workshops, whether you were engaging in business simulations. And of course, I've picked up a few from Joe's presentation, which I wish we had embedded in our questionnaire. Yeah, but I think one of the most interesting stuff, too, is the kind of theoretical precision we're bringing in here, drawing on Gibson's work, which has been left on its own. Nobody's talking about perceptual learning at all, even though there are different types of learning, first order, second order. Nobody's talking about how organizations learn about the environment. So perception, stimuli, and so on, which we think is quite interesting, bearing in mind that foresight itself is just about understanding the business environment, which is uncertain, ambiguous, complex, and keeps changing.
Is perceptual learning foresight, or is foresight perceptual learning?
In this in this case, we're very much using them interchangeably. But I think when we go for submission, this is something that will be picked up. So we might just simply. It's difficult to get rid of perceptual learning because that's our theoretical lens. But we will actually have to explain that. Look, we are conceptualizing foresight as a perceptual learning practice in organization. Strategic foresight, perceptual learning practice.
Any more questions for David? There is at least one author who believes that rather than SMEs having, there's a question at the back, that rather than SMEs having foresight, that SMEs are society's foresight. It is the experiments that take place in enterprises that produces the future for society.
Well, it links in very much with some of the stuff you do as well about entrepreneurship and sensing opportunities and all those kind of things. And of course, in so many economies, you know that they are run by SMEs. Most economies are dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. So we cannot focus all our attention on just big organizations who have all the resources that they can engage in all this kind of massive, kind of projects. Yeah. But we will have to make very simple tools available for SMEs, which they can use in their everyday situated practices to identify opportunities and limits of which most of the time their competitors are likely to overlook.
Okay, there's a question at the back, I think, somewhere.
She was just stretching.
Oh, no, it was just stretching. Okay. Well, in that case, I think we should thank you very much indeed, David, for that presentation and move on. So, David, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the paper, we've got a draft copy of the paper, which I will give to Dec, who can make it available so that you can get more details on the kind of methodological stuff.
Okay. The next, thanks, David. The next presentation is a slight variation to your program. There we are. This presentation is actually slotted at 17:15, but for logistical reasons, we've moved it forward to swap with Kuniko, who will present later. So this presentation is by Ricardo Seidl da Fonseca, who's a consultant on Foresight, Austria, STI in Senegal towards 2035, an agenda for inclusive and sustainable development. This one here, okay? Ricardo, the floor is yours. Thank you.
First, I would like to thank Kuniko. My name is not Kuniko. Kuniko gave me the possibility to talk now because we have a meeting later, and I thank you very much. And also, I'd like to thank the ISSEK to place my presentation in this conference. I'm very happy to be here. The presentation I am presenting here is a proposal we are discussing with UNIDO to create an agenda for inclusive and sustainable development based on a functioning and supportive STI system. This is, we are talking about a country with limited resources, Senegal, but with a huge need of speed up the social and economic development. The basis of this project, of this proposal, is to arrange a system, find agreements between the actors in the STI in Senegal to build or to rebuild the national STI system to be directly to be supportive to social, cultural, economic development. And the main question here is how to achieve leapfrog advance through the mobilization of local talents and with complementarities through international participation. The proposal here is to develop the science technology policies and strategy based in 4 blocks of information and agreements. The first one is the STI role in strategic dynamics. That means to understand the position of Senegal in the STI business and understand the strengths, the weakness of the country and how to mobilize it in as a dynamic process. Also to look for the engagement and networking of the actors in the STI, to check this engagement or results of the STI through performance analysis, and also to think here an exercise of a so-called foresight for, and in this case, as an agenda of the future. I will explain this, why we're calling this. The first block is to determine, to define, and to show the historical, present, and envisaged role of STI in this country, which, in a way, till now, the contribution was very limited. We use for this to understand, to have a rationale, 2 lines. One, to use the UN goals on sustainable development fixed by the conference this year in New York, and also to understand the regional and the country characteristics and realities, both inside the context of Africa, but also in Senegal. In the case of Sustainable Development Goals, they fix 17, we fix on the 9th, which says that the country should build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. This is in the domain of UNIDO, inclusive and sustainable industrial development. This is now, in a way, orienting the whole action of the organization. And then the question is that the goals admit that industry and industrialization are the main drivers of sustainable economic growth, environment sustainability, and shared prosperity. In the case of understanding the situation in Senegal, we have to see how Senegal is placed. According to the World Bank, Senegal is under the middle-income countries at the lower level. And then we will take in these projects three countries as benchmark, as reference: South Africa playing an upper role, and Ghana and Kenya with similar situation as Senegal. For Senegal, there are two basic documents which orient the development process. One is the National Development Strategy towards 2035, and the National Strategy of Economic Social Development, which is ongoing, and this sees the years of 2017. This is shorter, but here we found in the document a clear indication of what is expected from research, development, and innovation. And in a way, it's also, you see that the government and the countries are expecting a direct contribution, both to create a new infrastructure, but also to address the issues of rural areas and create new operational unities, and to create mobilize information and transfer of technology, and also to promote public and private partnerships. You see, it's the STI is seen with a very focused responsibility in the country. So in engagement of a network and STI system, we are using the UNIDO National System of Innovation Surveys. This is a questionnaire and calculations to understand the role of the different actors, how they are cooperating, how they are looking to cooperate in the future. The survey divides the actors in different roles, functions, from government to research institute, financial institution, whatever, and try to identify some dimensions, linkage between research institutes and business enterprise, the importance of the actors, to see the intra-actor linkage, to understand the factors, constraints on innovation, how policy instruments can be successful, and also understanding how these instruments can be placed to really promote innovation. This exercise uses the triple helix type 4 as a reference. UNIDO developed their own scheme on this helix, and through calculations and algorithms, it's possible to understand and to calculate, in a way, the inter and intralinkage between the actors. This is an example of the Ghana exercise, and then we see that the linkage are very unbalanced. And this, we expect that the same will be found in Senegal. I will not go on detail, this you will see in the presentation, only to report a little bit on this exercise is that the UNIDO divide has 4 sub-index: environment, readiness, usage, and impact, divide on pillars. And through these calculations, you can compare different countries. Here is a hypothetical low middle income group, and then is the Ghana there. You can understand the positioning of the country. And this survey can also identify the latent factors to barriers to innovation, also the latent factors to policy success. The Ghana is very interesting, present a very interesting results, which in a way repeat in Kenya. And I think the same will appear in Senegal, which confirms that these countries can be seen as, in a way, homogeneous in the country, in the region. The second group is the performance analysis of STI system. The basic will be the OECD STI outlook. And here is to try to use international indicators to qualify the performance of the country. We'll select some of the dimension and performance indicators to base our analysis, and then try to use some other countries to give us the difference and how far the country is positioned today. Here an example put in Senegal against South Africa and Austria. In this case, it's GERD in percentage of GDP. And also to use the outlook to understand the development of these countries. You see, is the green one is Senegal. You see that the position is very low in regards to South Africa in red and Austria in blue. There's a lot of effort to be done. The fourth position or block will be the foresight to create an agenda of the future. Here the foresight, in the case of Senegal, is in a way to create a consensus among the actors. And part of this will be done through the UNIDO survey, and part we'll do and separately in a foresight exercise. And we look here for a dynamic approach. And it's something that I would like to discuss with the colleagues, how to depart from a very far-looking foresight to a more, let's say, day-to-day foresight exercise that mobilize the actors in a way that they can see the horizon near. And we will deal with politicians and mostly, and people, CEOs of big companies, and they don't want to talk about 35 and then to discuss what they can do today. And this is a challenge, and I hope that our colleagues will also contribute for this. And this is what I call dynamic foresight, implies on using timeline sequencing. And this is what, in the case of traditional foresight, we leave this just for the road mapping. And in this case, we would like to use all methods with timeline sequencing. And here the idea is to explore possible and envisage chain of events. What should be done, day by day, year by year, to achieve this new performance and new engagement of the national system of innovation. And here, the foresight is not just to create reports, it's a real process. And the main issue here is how to create agreements among the actors. And that they see that what they are doing is a common compact. We try to identify methods, foresight techniques, which can help in this exercise, which can be bound on timeline, sequence of events and results. And then they can reinforce the preparation of the strategies and policy and strategies in the core of this exercise. The suitable methods till now, of course, the key performance indicators is very important, linked to the outline. Also, we would like to develop a kind of successive year scenarios, and also multi-years R&D timing and planning, and a policy recommendation chain. This is not a list of recommendations, but put on time what the actors should be done in the time. And we would like to have also a panel expert and survey continuing, not to have just a panel and bye-bye, pick the suitcase and go home, but we'd like to have a permanent expert team working on this project. Here is what I imagine in a scenarios. You see all these scenarios year by year. And this is a challenge, that we are accustomed to talk about scenarios far away. And here we would like to discuss scenarios year by year. Oscar is looking to me, and I think this, we have to reinvent this. Yeah. We found a logical framework. This is also my position. If you want to follow a project, and at the end you can evaluate the project, you have to fix from the beginning a logical framework. In this project, we are discussing this logical framework to orient the project. And in here, we are showing that all blocks will go in parallel. And this is a little bit what we did in Vietnam, in Romania, and here the innovation is that not only the foresight parallel to STI policy and strategy, but also the creation of the indicators. The survey takes some time. You need a survey, takes some time. The positioning of the countries will take time also because the statistics are not up to date in Senegal. There is one exercise will be to create and the statistics and indicators in the country. And then the innovation here and the challenge that the information will come during the process. And this also will imply that our scenarios building will be done according to the fresh information collected. And this is will be a big challenge on this. So with this presentation, I would like to, again, to thank your attention. And I would be happy if you have some also important and challenging questions and inputs. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Ricardo. And in my language, you appear to be proposing some form of anticipatory system with lots of monitoring and sensing. And the real issue is what's the effector? How can that drive change towards that vision or vision of the future where Senegal is developing as a country? There you have a desired future. And how do you achieve that? That seems to be the nature of the project. Very interesting project. Do we have any questions now? Questions? Yes.
Alexander Chulok, High School of Economics. So thanks, Ricardo. Impressive presentation as usual. I just have one idea maybe to share with you. When I see indicators, I think that all indicators are proxies of something that's going on. So maybe we'll think of some indicators for foresight activity, like regional foresight index, as an attitude to get the common vision by different stakeholders, and we could think about environment, and we could think about institutional structure that leads to foresight, some events in STI policy, etc. We could do it within a foresight network international if we could use this foresight index, regional foresight index, to compare different countries and different levels of foresight attitude. I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, good idea. It's
a good idea. Any more good ideas? Any questions? Yeah, there's one there, please.
Hello, I'm Hưng from Vietnam. Thank you for your presentation. And following your slides, as we can see that you try to use some very much OECD methodology and try to apply it for Senegal and other countries. From what I learned using OECD methodology for developing country, we face many problems. Data is not available. Many things is not relevant. I just take one example. We mentioned about R&D and use quite a lot of R&D indicator for evaluating. But I think that in the context of a developing country, sometimes R&D statistic is not enough. We may need other kind of, knowledge can generate from experience, from learning, and how you, take that into account into your project.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, this is clear. I didn't present, we are using also two indexes. One is the Global Innovation Index and also the Innovative Union Index from Europe. They were able to collect more, let's say, information, and they have other indicators. And this we will use. The OECD question is that we would like to use international reference, because if you go to the country, and in the case of Senegal, there are some collection of information, but it's very, I'd say, not continuing, and that's. But it is important for the country to have it, to be put in the position in the international arena. Your suggestion is very good. We would also take into consideration not only the numbers, but I think the question of learning is very important. I will check if in this survey that UNIDO does is there. If not, I think we have to include it. You are correct.
Interesting question.
You notice that in this exercise, I don't talk about vision of the future. Because in the first discussion, when we talk about these people, we want an agenda. Please don't come with a vision.
Right.
Because that is why at the beginning I have talked about an agenda of the future.
Yeah.
And this is what, if you work in a country where the people, they need quick answers and they are facing with big crises and big difficulties and limited resources, it's a problem to talk about foresight. When I was in UNIDO, we tried to create a foresight program in other, for example, in Africa, and the difficulty is that people don't know that this is not for Africa. And then they have to reconsider the language we have been doing to come to understand that we are not talking about only high-tech and high-end and rosy futures, but also is the way to create agreements to have a common future.
That's a very important point. I think you have a goal articulated through the United Nations Goal 9, I believe you said, and it's how are we going to do this? We have to do it together. So that means developing something like a foresight community, and then let's go. Let's get on with it. That's it, isn't it?
That's it.
That's it. Easy.
Thank you.
Any final question or point before we move on?
Can I just have comments that I like the idea that you use the foresight as a tool for people to come together, agree on an agenda. But once the agenda is agreed, how can you coordinate
That's the main
different
question,
actors?
yes.
And I think it is not an easy work.
That is, you see, that is why the preparation of the policy has to be in using all this information, and this is the way. As the foresight is here in the bottom, they will create ideas, agreements, and so, and then this goes to the science, technology policy and strategies, and is formalized there. And at the end, there will be a plan or a document, whatever. Yeah, but this is and as I said, all these 4 blocks, they have to go in parallel together with the formulation of science, technology, innovation. Yeah, this is the main issue. It's not saying I will go in sequence. It has to be embedded in the exercise of strategy and policy.
Very good. Ricardo, for that wonderful exposition and challenging project you have in front of you, and the best of luck for that. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Ricardo. And then we move straight on to our next presenter, who is Epaminondas Christofilopoulos, from the Greek node, it says here, of the Millennium project, Praxi network, and Greece, who's going to present on China 2025. Is that the population in billions, or is that the year? Research and innovation landscape, trends and scenarios. Epaminondas, over to you.
Thanks. Thank you. All right. First, thank you for inviting me here. ISSEK did a great job. I was invited last year, but Lufthansa strike destroyed my plans, so I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to come this year and present the finalized study, because last year was still ongoing. Everybody's tired. I'm tired. So for some reason, I don't know why, but I think it's relevant. Since yesterday, I'm recalling a very old joke since I was a student in Greece. So I will just tell you, and I will explain why it's relevant. So there are 2 students going to school for oral examinations, and the first one goes inside, and the teacher asks him, who was the leader of Germany in the Second World War? And he replies, Adolf Hitler. The second question, when the Russian Revolution took place, and he said, I don't know if this is correct, but he said in 1905 unsuccessfully, in 1917 successfully. And then he asked him, are there aliens? And he says, it's not proved yet. So then goes outside and he goes to his friend and he says, you will reply Adolf Hitler, then 1905, 1917, and then it's not proved yet. So he goes inside and the teacher asks him, what is your name? He says, Adolf Hitler. How old are you? When did you born? He says, in first attempt was in 1905, but the successful was 1917. And then, are you an idiot? He says, it's not proved yet. So, all right, what I want to say is that it's very important how we transfer. We are doing things, we are producing a lot of knowledge, but it is very important how we transfer this knowledge to the people that they should understand what we are talking about. And this is why I believe that foresight is science in a very big part of it, but then it's art also. And I believe that people here, futurists or foresight experts, they need to have also a very strong artistic character. You need to have a talent to be able to produce something that makes sense and it's meaningful. So very quickly, and I'm going to use, I'm really sorry I prepared this on a Mac computer, so maybe it's not very, it's not going to work perfectly, but I think we'll sort it out. So I'm going to present you what we have done. I will not focus not only on the results, but I'm going to have a very balanced, I think, presentation, trying to present you also the methodology and how the methodology was utilized during the different steps of the study. I'm coming from two organizations. The one that is, let's say, most relevant to today's event, this is the Fimonoi Lab. And this is a startup dealing with future studies. It's actually also hosting the node of the Millennium project in Greece. And if you are wondering where our name comes from, Fimonoi was actually the first priestess in the Oracle of Delphi and daughter of Apollo. And this is also where our logo comes from one of the important, let's say, buildings in Delphi. All right, so let's go in our work for China. And before starting, just to give you a very, very, very quick one-slide overview, because everybody is talking about China, and I think more or less everybody understands and have a feeling of what is happening in China. But I would like to focus on one thing, and this is what is happening the last 2 years, is that the government is trying to change the way the economy is operating. So we have experiencing a shifting on a very top strategic level from economy based on low-cost manufacturing to an economy that is going to be based more on service provision, on internal consumption, and of high-tech products, of Chinese branded high-tech products. So this is something that is going on the last 2-3 years, and it's ongoing. It's a big work. Urbanization is one of the tools that is used by the government to support, let's say, internal consumption. There are other policies and other tools. We have talked before about the one-child policy that is changed because population is an issue. I don't know if this is going to affect, we will see. But what we have seen the last 30 years, and that was what we call the biggest social experiment of all times. We have a huge generation of people that have no sisters or brothers, and that never happened before. So we'll see what is going to happen in the future, because these people are not used to have brothers and sisters, and so we're going to see how the society is going to change. All right, so our client for this study was the European Commission, Director General for Research and Innovation, so we naturally focused mainly on research and technology. And the final deliverable, let's say, the report, it was the title of my presentation, China 2025. So this is more or less what we have done. You heard a lot of these things since the morning. So we started by defining our, let's say, central question. A lot of work about what happened so far, what the history so far related with our problems, what are the main actors, the assets, what are the main trends affecting the changes on the research environment, and we finally produce 4 scenarios. This is another way to present it because this makes more sense. This is a logical, this is a road trip that we moved through the process in order to finalize and reach the final scenarios. But I think what was most important, and that took us some weeks to define because that was the initial point, the starting point, but that was a very critical one for all the research that took place. It was what was going to be the focal question. And we decided that what are the main factors that will affect the competitive growth of the Chinese research environment in the next 15 years. And we structured all the work around this main question. So we did, as you have heard in several cases today, we have done a stakeholders analysis to see what are the main actors, internal, external, on a global level or a national level or a regional level. China is a huge country, so we did an extensive analysis, but we just wanted to see what are the main actors and what are the main stakeholders. And what we did also at the same time, we did a lot of desktop analysis, media scanning, blogs, newspapers, websites, talking with experts in China and around the world. And we more or less, we were very confident about the initial selection of trends that we thought are going to be important to work with. So we had 16 trends, but we wanted to have someone to validate these trends. So we initiated, let's say, a mini Delphi study. We sent a questionnaire to experts around the world, to the Millennium project nodes, to industrial stakeholders around the world, to Chinese actors. And we had quite a good balance from replies. So we had like half of the feedback coming from China. And what we also did, and that was not only for the first stage, but we had this running throughout all the project. We had the crowdsourcing, let's say, tool, and this is an application that you can download in your mobile phone. So we asked people to go outside in China and spot things that they feel are important, things that show a change in the society or in technology. So that was interesting, mainly on giving us some information of how to put some nice information on the trends or in the scenarios. So it was not a main tool for many reasons, for technical difficulties, using this in China. Website was sometimes unreachable, so we had some technical problems, but we used this tool for getting some feedback. So we did the analysis. These are the 16 trends. Very quickly, it's the national economy, the research framework conditions, private R&D investment, energy and resources, governance, urbanization, human rights, global economy, peace and conflict, space and defense, environment, population, IPR, global communications, language skills, and the education system in the country in all levels. So using these trends, we used the experts to evaluate these trends, so we had a clearer picture then, which of those trends are really important, and which of those trends are more plausible, let's say, to continue in the same way affecting the research environment in China. And what was the first outcome? Something that we more or less expected. We found 2 big interesting trends, and this is the governance in the country, and this is something you expect in a country with a very central planning. And the other one was the national economy, which is also something that you expect when we are talking about R&D. So we kept this information in our minds. We ran a trend analysis. China trend analysis, okay. And we evaluated the trends for their probability to occur, their importance, and we got this nice map. So then we found out that we have 6 trends, 6 important trends that are very, let's say, more or less certain to occur. And we have 6 others that are still important, but we are not very sure how they are going to evolve. And we use this information when we started drafting the scenarios. What we did also, and we talked a lot about wildcards. So when we did a lot of research, we found some things that, of course, it's not a trend, but we thought that these things might be important in the future if something or one of them might happen. So, for example, if there's going to be a conflict in Southeast Chinese Sea, or if we have a nuclear accident or social unrest in the country, or the collapse of a booming property market. And you can see some weakness signals for some of them, but we don't know if they are going to occur. But we used some of them in a couple of the scenarios. So then we ran a cross-impact analysis to see how the different trends are affecting each other. And again, we have these 2 things appearing again, and this is again national economy and governance. So we see that the national economy is not only affecting, but is also heavily affected by a lot of other trends. And we see also naturally that governance is a very important driving force affecting a lot of policies and a lot of other trends in the country. And then we started building our scenarios, and I will use just 10 seconds here to say that this report was, our client was the European Commission. So European Commission, people, they're receiving thousands of reports every year, so they don't read most of them. So we wanted to produce something that is going to be really appealing. They're gonna at least spend 10 minutes reading easily, so we don't, we spend a lot of resources from our side, resources that was not foreseen in the beginning on designing the final study, on producing an appealing material, because we wanted people to spend some time and read this. So you will see fewer data in the report, but more, let's say other kind of information. So these are the 4 scenarios, and we decided to use the 2 important aspects for building the scenario, so governance and the national economy. And we have yin and yang, blue jasmine, breathless queens, and Dungeons and Dragons as the 4 scenarios. So in the first case, the yin and yang, this is, let's say, from my point of view, the best scenario. So we have President Xi Jinping being able to and continue to make a lot of reforms in the country on different levels. We are reading in the news a lot of things that he's trying to pass in the country. So we see a country that is more transparent, and we see China becoming a global leader in investing in R&D. We see also the first native Chinese Nobel Prize winners. There are, I think, 4 or 5, but all of them are now from foreign universities, so no one is based in China. So let's say in this best case scenario, we also expect to have a couple of Chinese researchers becoming Nobel Prize winners. In the second case, in the Dungeons and Dragons, here the government is still in power and quite powerful. And however, we see that in this case, not all the important reforms have taken place. So we have a governance that is still powerful, but also putting some, let's say, is blocking also in some aspects the research. So we're going to see again low-cost innovations, but also innovations in ICT, defense, space, and transport technologies. In the Blue Jasmine scenario, here we have, let's say, a peaceful, quiet China. The economy is not going so well, and this we see also, let's say, a wild card, a rare earth metal crisis. So we have some problems, but we see a lot of research focusing mostly on alternative materials, biotechnology, and health. And this is the 4th scenario. This is the worst case scenario, limited funds for research, but still China focusing on some aspects like energy, space, and biotechnology. All right, so that was more or less. I'd be happy to send you the study electronically, but if you wanted to have it on print, but because printing is expensive, you have to buy, but I can give you my email and I can send you electronically. And before closing, just a slide. This is something else that we are doing. This is an executive course for strategic planning, and this is something that we are doing with our partners in Sweden, Finland, Belgium, and UK. So this is an executive course for people interested on this kind of work. So thank you. I was really quick, maybe.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nondas. I think we have enough time for you to explain the final scenario. You jumped over the two, and there is enough time for that.
All right.
Yeah.
I was a bit afraid that.
Yeah. No, we have time. Yeah.
All right. So the last scenario is the yin and yang. Oh no, it's the breathless queen. So China emerges, I can read it more peacefully now, emerges as a fragile superpower, which can be linked to the Soviet Union of the 80s. Short-sighted and insufficient financial reforms have limited the financial growth to only below 3%. We see a lot of domino social effects. We see the middle class and also ethnic minorities to complain for several issues. And we see an old-fashioned research system remain as it is today with limited funds. And we see a country that is focusing on some very strategic areas, which is for the government, but not on very competitive on a global level. So we see some advances in space, energy, and biotechnology. So that was the idea. Still, I have 1 minute, so I will say that what is going on now, because by giving this report to the Commission, they wanted to have now some more information regarding how the markets are changing or some feedback about what strategy the European Commission should follow. So the last, let's say, 5 months, we continue phase 2, and now we are focusing mostly we spend more time focusing on, let's say, how the markets are changing in the country. And we also see how the markets are changing in Europe and how it is changing in China. What are the new business models? And in parallel, of course, we continue to see the trends on society, on technologies. So this is going to be phase 2 that probably will be finalized next year.
Very good. Okay, so we have some questions, starting with Jose. So.
Yeah, I was actually reading the study, so I highly recommend it for public policy. Okay. And well, you talked about a continuation, but how about India? Because India is maybe 10, 20 years behind. How about India 2035?
Just like that.
Well, I mean, if you ask me, I think the Commission lacks this kind of long-term strategic planning, and this is something very difficult. We were just lucky that we were selected to do this for China. There was not something, we made the proposal and that was something that they approved. But it was not like they were thinking, okay, let's do a foresight study for China. So it was our initiative. We suggested to do this, and that was approved. So for India, there are some other activities, but not on a foresight level. I think it was a similar exercise that was run for Southeast Asia and for sure in the Mediterranean. With having the Commission as a client. But for sure not India. We tried to do something for USA, but still was not the case.
More questions? Yes, one there at the back, Young.
Thank you. I'm Surajai from the APEC Center for Technology Foresight. I'm interested in your Delphi survey. As you shown, approximately 40 replies or respondents from the Delphi survey. Just want to know how many samples you survey for this. I mean, how many surveys?
That was a big sample. I don't recall now the sample, but we focused. At least we tried to focus on people that were either collaborating on a bilateral level, so Europe and China, or they were futurists, or they were researchers in China. sorry, I'm not recalling, but I would say a very rough estimation, the response rate was something like 15%. 1.5.
Alexander?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Could you show me slides where you mentioned up? Could you list up one more? One more? One more? Excuse me. One more. Okay. So actually, no. Okay. I will. You mentioned several issues which are not which are important, but some of them were more or less well defined. Some were very uncertain.
You mean about the wildcards?
Yeah. When when you mentioned 6 or 7.
All right.
Yeah, you remember? Yes, this one.
Yeah.
And uncertain. Why did you choose this finance and the way of ruling for your scenarios? Not this one, or did you take into account this one when you described your scenarios?
All right. Yes. Well, we had 16 trends that were evaluated, and the 6 you see here, the 6 certain and 6 uncertain. These are both important, but the 6 ones were really certain. The other 6 were not very certain to occur. So we took them when we were writing the scenarios. We took them in our mind, and but it was not like we used our, let's say, for example, societal piece. We built some scenarios because that was not a certain trend. For the certain trends, we more or less used the same aspect in all the scenarios. But for example, for these uncertain trends, for some scenarios we used let's say the bad case, and some for the other scenarios we used the best case. But that was, let's say, the artistic part of the report. So we chose that to present some plausible futures for the country that will include, let's say, the most plausible, let's say, trends.
Okay, well, we'll draw this particular presentation to a close on the note that this is an artistic report, or has artistic sections in it, which I think is fantastic. So, Nondas, thank you very much indeed for that good presentation. Thank you. And one final presentation in this session before coffee break is Alexander Chulok from ISSEK. He will present from where he's sitting.
Yeah, I think it's better.
He's nailed to the seat.
All right, and I try to continue with institutional path speaking in English on our Foresight Conference. So, good afternoon, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you here in Higher School of Economics, and it's an honor to be last speaker in the session, closing up, and have an advantage because I've seen all presentations. So, I'd like to share with you a few ideas. So first, we'll talk a bit about challenges and changing environment of foresight and STI studies. How we see it from a Russian perspective. Then I'd like to tell you a few words about system of S&T Foresight in Russia, and I think that we are reaching critical mass and ready to get to the whole system. And then we'll move to some tasks and challenges for S&T Foresight 2040. So we heard about 2025, we heard about 2035, now we have 2040. Everybody who is familiar with Russian STI policy agenda knows that now we have a few topics in our agenda. So everybody's talking about crisis, oil prices, sanctions and anti-sanctions, and everybody's thinking about substitution of import in Russia. But the whole picture, the complex picture is that we face and we should find some responses to global challenges. You've heard for today lots of interesting and very critical challenges. I think that they are quite the same in China, India, US, UK, and Russia. Everybody is talking about changes in society, in technological paradigm, in changing global value chains and environmental problems and diseases. And this leads us to a very simple question. Does Russian science and technology policy have a strategic agenda? I think it's a quite tough question, not only for Russian S&T policy, but as well for other countries. And as we all know, foresight is believed to be a good cure for searching and exploring the future. And I'd like to share with you this picture. On the left is a number of publications on foresight in Russian journals. As you see, it's rapidly rising in all topics and all journals in Russian. We all have foresight sessions. We even have foresight fleet, foresight clubs. But the question is it really a foresight project? If we sit together and just chat, it's not a foresight session. If we have a SWOT analysis, it's not a foresight research, as we know. So now we have a boosting of foresight exercises in Russia, and the scope of foresight exercises is getting wider and wider. And as the next slide, I just would like to share with you foresight projects made by just ISSEK within a several period of time. As you can see, there are different projects on different levels. We have a few very serious projects on federal level, including S&T Foresight 2040, and you can find information on the desks near you. At regional level, within the programs for regional clusters and such initiatives, we also have a huge amount of research interest in using foresight for searching our regional agenda. If we're talking about sectoral and corporate level, we have different foresight exercises, including roadmaps for almost 25 different topics, starting from space and getting back to agriculture. And the last but not the least, in foresight infrastructure, we'll talk a bit about networking activities. And I think that sustainable network is one of the imperatives for successful foresight study. So here is just one picture about Russian S&T Foresight centers led by High School of Economics, and this network includes around 600 different research organizations, institutions, corporations, think tanks on almost all scientific and industrial topics on foresight. The main question is how this network could help us to identify those challenges and threats that Russia should find a response. So here's a very conceptual and very interesting picture which provides us a three level of Russian S&T system. So the first level is national, starting from address of our president to Duma and to Federal Assembly, including strategic foresight, budget forecast, and socio-economic development forecast. We can say that now we are constructing a national level of S&T Foresight system, and Russian S&T Foresight is in the core of this system. Getting to sectoral level, I can say that a few ministers, industrial ministers, like Ministry for Health, Ministry for ICT, for Transport, for Agriculture, now are providing future agenda for their clients, and we can say that now sectoral S&T Foresight systems are building in Russia. And the last but not the least, regional level, which is very important to place all foresight and STI policy ideas and decisions on a regional level. So this picture is driven by state law, which was approved last year, and I can say that for strategic planning, and I can say that now we have a really good window of opportunity to integrate foresight into policy-making process. But before doing it, please take just 1 minute and think of requirements that we should establish for foresight projects to call them really foresight and be efficient in the policy-making process. And here I'd like to share with you a few ideas about obligatory and additional foresight requirements. For sure, we should think about methodological aspects, including experts and different stakeholders, integration into decision-making process. And here it's very important to understand that if you call a project a foresight project, it should meet very simple but very important requirements. So next step is understanding what could be done on national level. And here is some manual how you can use a Foresight 2030. It's free. You can download on our website, and we have it in English and in Russian. And by doing it, we used quite familiar methods that I see in previous presentation in China. So it's really very interesting that we are going in the same direction. So we used, for example, STPV analysis for our trends. We identified more than 150 global trends in different areas. Then we go for estimation effects. What are the effects on technology, on society, on our policy? Then we skip through and go to products and market niches, understanding what will be the product and services, and what are the characteristics of this product and services that could be useful in new global value chains and new economies. And then we go for identifying S&T priority areas. So this whole picture could be described as a complex roadmap for S&T Foresight 2030. But changing and turbulence in environment leads us for understanding the new cycle of foresight should get us on a new platform of understanding and a new paradigm. For sure, the future is a probability, and we are talking about scenarios. But the main question, as I understand, as I think in scenarios, is building access. So what are the axes for your scenarios, and how you identify this axis is very important. And then you describe your scenarios within some logic and methodology. So if we're talking about S&T Foresight 2040, their tasks and key steps, I'd like to show you some theoretical ideas about basic hypotheses that should be put before we talk about the future, we talk about Vision 2040. So first of all, we should understand what is the new technological paradigm. We're all talking about robotics, new manufacturing technologies, ICT technologies, smartization of everything, including smartization of ourselves, of human being and human enhancement. But are we sure that our economical models suits this new changes in technological paradigm? For sure, we should understand that global value chains are changing dramatically, and several blocks are getting to the past, like some Mediterranean. You know everything about Uber, you know everything about this platform technologies, and we understand that the value is being distributed in another way within this global value chains, which is very important. So then our economy is not only economy about knowledge, everything is talking about knowledge, but I think it's economy about actions. And here, China, India, maybe Russia and other countries could be in the beginning of new economical area. So we should act, and very rapid, very fast. We can get knowledge from everywhere, but the only thing is, are you successful in market or not? So market and being useful for ultimate consumer, I think is our crucial key performance indicator, KPI in a new economy. So consumer haven, for sure, could be one of our main target, and we should think how demand is changing and how we could meet it. So if we skip to another hypothesis, I'd like to emphasize that our educational models, and we're here in High School of Economics, a leading Russian university, but we should understand that education models are changing rapidly, and we could go to skills portfolios where you can get knowledge from everywhere, from internet, from your brain, from your neighbors. But the only question is, are you successful on this market or not? I think it's very important. So to fulfill this hypothesis and to test this hypothesis, a new cycle of foresight, we're going to get together two ideas. First idea is market pool. So starting from understanding of new markets. Well, no, it doesn't show. All right. So starting from understanding what are the new markets, what are the wild cards and global trends that constitute these markets. We'll go to understanding the products that we should produce and services to be successful in this market. And what is the technological paradigm, and are we ready for this technological paradigm? What's about our infrastructure? What's about our capacity to be ready to this new technological paradigm, technological wave, to produce those goods and services that could be helpful for us in new economy? So it's three level of logic here, and we should put it into new cycle of foresight. But market pool is not enough to fulfill all these hypotheses that I already told you. And I think it's very important to think about technologically push on the whole technological landscape, including data mining, including literature review, bibliometrics, research fronts, and other things. We should first compose an overall technological landscape and assume that technology is a vector with different characteristics and specifications, and then set up a system of criteria for understanding what are our priorities, how to set priorities. Because for each country, budget is very restricted, and we know it perfect. But we should think about priorities not only from market approach, but also from technological approach. And I think that comparing these two approaches is extremely important. So if we're talking about scenarios, how to deal with scenarios, for sure, we first should understand what are the industrial forks here and what could be the different levels of scenarios. And as I already told you, I think that access is extremely important here. But there's also three main questions when you are building scenarios. First, where do you want to go? What is the vision that you'd like to build? Second question is where you can go. What about your infrastructure capacity? Are you ready for this? And the last question, what other countries and your counterparts think of this? What China thinks about position of Russia in global economy? What India thinks about China and Russia in global economy? What Brazil and US thinks about this? So I think it's very important if we talk about global players to understand that our world is hyperlinked. And we all are in a big value chain. So it's very important to provide a good network and understanding that the place under the sun is a bit limited. So maybe we should find another sun or try to expand this place. So to fulfill this market technology and scenarios approach, we get to understanding that our foresight, next cycle of foresight, should include three types of areas. So first type is, as we call it, cross-sectoral technologies. So these are technologies that are horizontal and their effects could be seen almost in each economy and in each sectors. ICT technologies, new manufacturing technologies, maybe space technologies. It could be questionable. It's quite flexible, but I think that new vision and new prism for these cross-sectoral technologies could be also interesting as a hypothesis. Second understanding and second sub-areas for next cycle of foresight should be industries and markets. And it's very important, as I already told you, to understand what are the challenges on this market. So what are the key performance indicators? What are the KPIs for health? What is the key performance indicator for media, for energy, for smart energy? Can we identify these key performance indicators, and can we then understand what should be the technological portfolio to fulfill this demand from key performance indicators? And then the third type of sub-areas is special cases like security, educational technologies, and financial service. So this is a subject structure of S&T Foresight. If we're talking about functional structure, so we go from understanding what is the landscape of global trends and challenges, what are the threats and opportunities, which is very important. Then we go for understanding what are our capacities and how Russia is looking on this landscape. Then we go for foresight on subject areas. Think about demand on skills and labor force. It's a separate topic, but it's extremely important. Are you ready for new economy? Do you think that your skills will be enough to be competitive in a new market? I'm not sure, and this is a very tough question, because you cannot just extrapolate different trends. You should understand what is the vision, and then what skills should be important for this vision. So it's a tricky question. And the last but not the least is integration and STI policy. I think that example and experience for Russian economy could be quite interesting. And as we can see, several countries are coming to Russia. They want to know our experience. About 3 months ago, we have a special training course for our colleagues from Vietnam on STI policy, and other countries are also interested in this maybe state-driven approach, but it's also interesting how different companies at stakeholders on micro level could be a part of this initiative. And the last but not the least, I think that unfortunately we have missed previous technological wave, but I'm sure that we have a window of opportunity to be a part of a new technological paradigm, at least before singularity. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Alexander, with a hugely comprehensive program and plan for Foresight here, and a very brave attempt to bring different departments of government to work together in this as well. It's always a challenge to do that. Do we have any questions for Alexander? Yep, there's one here.
Thank you very much for excellent presentation. My question is that when you are making scenarios, have you considered about future vision, or because we can make many scenarios, so which means if we don't have any policy or vision for the future, then maybe very, very difficult to make scenarios.
Thanks for brilliant question, because as I know, there's a program software that could build about 10,000 different scenarios. I think our client isn't ready for this. So we have a few scenarios in Russia that are produced by our ministries of economy development and ministries for finance. So first, when we are thinking about different axes, we are thinking about financial axis and intensity of STI policy. So this is very important. And I think that rational number of scenarios could be 5, 4, but not more. It's a very important point.
May I add a little bit? Yeah, we made a brief description of scenarios in English, and you will be given it later today. And I will highly appreciate if you give your feedback on our description of a scenario. It's just a couple of pages. Okay, thank you.
I actually have a general remark, not about the particular case of Russia, but about all the cases we've been hearing. This is a bit of a kind of a warning probably, or reminding ourselves one of the key aspects of foresight, which is imagination and creativity. So, but I haven't heard actually, since probably the beginning of the day and through the presentations, that we're not talking too much about the creativity and imagination aspect of foresight. I see that most of our activities are doing some sort of prediction of future technologies, some extrapolation of what we have seen, and then most of our foresight is shaped by our most immediate context. So by 2040 or 2050, I can assure that we will see at least 2 or 3 more economic crises. So this is recurring every 5 years, so we shouldn't be shocked every time when it comes. The key question is that whether we can actually create some kind of resilient systems to overcome this kind of economic crisis when it hits next time. Otherwise, I feel like we are continuously hitting the wall or on the window like a fly, and then coming to the economic crisis, and we are always shocked by it, equally actually, and sometimes even more. But it is very evident that actually if we keep doing the things in the same way as we do, there will be some more crises, and it won't be a surprise. And besides creativity, I think we need to have a bit of a systemic thinking also. So not to look at some scientific and technological areas in isolated or compartmentalized ways, we need to think about the systems and how they really interact with each other. I have been recently looking at the nexus of climate, energy, food, and water. It is really a very kind of a complex system which need to be thought in a kind of more holistic way, because all of them have some impacts on each other. By 2030, 2040, obviously, our energy demand will increase 40%, our food demand will increase 60%, and our water demand will increase another 40%. So can really the global system handle this? Or whether we can actually have some solutions to balance all these systems together with each other. So in summary, I mean, what I just want to suggest is that it would be a good idea probably to add some creativity, imagination, and systemic thinking into our force.
Okay, well, I'll pick that theme up later. We have some time for discussion at the end of the day. So rather than take more questions now, I'll bring that back into the theme, because we should close this session. Let me say, if I had to summarize the 4 papers with one word, then that word would be focus. The first paper was talking about businesses being over-focused and the need to extend their dimensions, distinctive approach. The second was about trying to get a focus on a particular goal and on a focus on the day-to-day activities. The third talked about focal questions with regard to competitive growth in China. And the fourth was about a focus on a strategic agenda for Russia. So if you want something to connect those presentations, I'm sorry I haven't taken all the questions, but we can open up the debate and discussion after the presentations later on. Thank you. We'll close now. We'll take a break for 15 minutes. Thank you.